Okay, so we're in Numbers, we're going to start out in Numbers 16 today, which I just referenced briefly last time. But what were some of the big events last time that we discussed? Yeah, Hudson?
Oh, last time?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yes, we did. Yeah.
I thought in general.
In general? That's, okay. Well, but in the book of Numbers, yeah. Patrick?
The spies were not allowed, or nobody was allowed to enter except for Moses, Joseph, and Caleb.
Joshua and Caleb, yes. Yeah, so basically, yes. The last time we looked at what are really the pivotal chapters, the turning point in the book of Numbers, which is Numbers chapter 13 and 14. The spies go to look at the land, then Israel refuses to go into the land. They rebel against God, they rebel against Moses. They say, let's appoint a leader and go back. I wish that we had died in the wilderness, and God says that's exactly what's going to happen. When God says go into the land, they don't go into the land. When God says you will not go into the land, they do try to go into the land, but God blocks them off. A bunch of people die in a battle. And then, yeah, so this is kind of why the book of Numbers exists. We'd still have other pieces of it, but this is kind of the center point of the story. Timmy, yeah?
The verse where it says, for a day that you don't go is a year.
Right, yeah.
You go for 40 years.
Right, exactly. That's what really defines the book in a sense. Numbers 14:34. Every day, but for the 40 days, you get a year until the generation number 1 dies off. And then remember, Numbers is kind of built around the 2 censuses. Numbers chapter 1, census of generation number 1. Numbers chapter 26, generation number 2, because that whole generation is going to die in the wilderness. Now look at, this is really bad, okay, that this has taken place. But then in chapter 15, God does show that the covenant is still in force. He is still going to bring the people into the land, but he is also going to bring consequences for sin and unbelief on that generation. And so look at Numbers 15, just 1 and 2. I'm just going to go over this briefly. But it says, Now Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the sons of Israel and say to them, When you enter the land, where you are going to live, which I am giving to you. Okay, so after just saying, you can't go into the land, you're going to die in the wilderness, he says, okay, I'm still going to give you instructions for when it is time for the next generation to go into the land. So the covenant is still in force. And so God gives them these commandments and gives them laws for when they're in the land. Again, there's a issue with the breaking of the Sabbath and how that's to be handled, which actually had the death penalty in the theocracy of Israel. Okay, so God was very serious about the Sabbath. Okay, and so they're even told in Numbers 15, in order to remind themselves to always keep God's commandments, to always follow God, they are supposed to make a cord of blue and white to hang down, kind of, Jews today would call this kind of a prayer shawl that they always wear to remind themselves to always follow God and his commandments with their heart. Okay. Now, we're going to see another rebellion. Okay. They're going to keep sinning. God will still keep being good to them. He will still keep punishing them for their sin. But we continually see sin over and over again in this book. Okay? And rebellion. And so you'd think they would learn, right? But this is how sin is. And if we were there, we could have been just like this as well. But now we're going to see the rebellion of Korah. And now this one is a questioning not of God, not of the manna, not of this other stuff, but this is a questioning of what makes Moses and Aaron special? Why did they and their sons have the priesthood? Korah and his group are part of kind of the priestly family as well. They're like, but you know what? We should be in your position, Aaron and Moses. This is not right that you seem to have this exclusive priestly family. That just doesn't seem appropriate. And so look at Numbers 16, verse 3, where they get together, a meeting to confront Aaron and Moses. It says, They assembled together against Moses and Aaron and said to them, You have gone far enough. Meaning, okay, we're taking you out. You're done. You have gone far enough. For all the congregation are holy, and every one of them. And Yahweh is in their midst. So why do you exalt yourselves above the assembly of the Lord? So they make an argument that is kind of true in a sense, but not in the way that they're saying it. They're saying we're all holy, right? There's a holy nation, a kingdom of priests. So they're like, we're all holy to the Lord. We're all supposed to kind of be like priests, but which that would be true. But then they say, now, Aaron, Moses, you're done. We're taking over. We're taking over the priesthood. We're going to lead. We're going to say that we're in charge. We're rejecting what God has done through you because they don't believe God is doing it through them. They believe Moses and Aaron are just asserting themselves. Okay, and so they're like, who are you, Aaron and Moses? Why do you guys exalt yourselves above all of God's people? Okay, and so we have a challenge here. And it would be kind of difficult, again, for Moses or Aaron to say, well, no, God really has chosen us and sent us, right? And put us in a special position. Well, okay, now there's going to be some proof. Look at verse 4, Numbers 16:4. When Moses heard this, he fell on his face, and he spoke to Korah and all his company, saying, tomorrow morning Yahweh will show you who is his, and who is holy, and who he will bring near to himself. Even the one whom he will choose, he will bring near to himself. So he says, okay, tomorrow, God's going to show you who he's going to choose. Whether he's chosen your group, your team, or whether he's chosen Aaron and I and our priestly family. He says, do this. Take censers for yourself, Korah, and all your company. And put fire in them, censers are the fire pans, and lay incense upon them in the presence of Yahweh tomorrow. And the man whom the Lord chooses shall be the one who is holy. You have gone far enough, you sons of Levi. Then Moses said to Korah, hear now, you sons of Levi. So Korah is part of the sons of Levi. They are part of the priestly family. But they're saying, we want Aaron's job and authority. Got the alarm going. Okay, so it says now in verse 9, he says, is it not enough for you that the God of Israel has separated you from the rest of the congregation of Israel to bring you near to himself, to do service in the tabernacle for Yahweh, to stand before the congregation and minister to them? And that he has brought you near, Korah, and you and all your brothers, you sons of Levi, with you. And are you seeking the priesthood also? So the sons of Korah, they were the worship directors. They were acting as priests. They had a special job. But he says, God's already given you this, and now you're saying, well, no, it's not good enough. We need Aaron's job. We need to be the priests. Right? And have you, in a positive way, have you guys heard of the sons of Korah before?
Yep.
Sons of Korah write some of the what? Music. Psalms. They write some of the Psalms. So Korah's family, not all of them are bad. Not all of them stand with him. The sons of Korah, there will be a righteous group in the sons of Korah that will write some of the Psalms. Not literal sons, but generations of Korah. Okay? So there's this confrontation that takes place. So Moses basically says, okay, we're going to stand in a certain area. Everybody wants to be with Korah, you go ahead and go over and stand next to him. And everybody who thinks that he's right, go over and hang out with him. But if everybody else is for the Lord, doesn't trust what Korah is doing, what are they supposed to do relative to Korah?
Stand away from him.
Stand away from him. Yeah. Somebody read Numbers 16, 20, and 21. Can somebody do Numbers 16, 20, and 21? Patrick, you heard that?
And the Lord spoke to Moses and to Aaron, saying, separate yourselves from among this congregation, that I may consume them in a moment.
Okay. Separate yourselves. Move away from them. Okay. It's kind of like the joke of, like when someone says something a little edgy, it's like, oh, I don't want to be next to you because, God's going to strike you with lightning type of thing. Well, that's kind of what's literally going on here in the sense that it's like, okay, judgment's coming for this person, so move because I'm going to consume them instantly. And then God does give some instructions. Look at, can somebody read Numbers 16, 23 and 24? Timmy?
Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the congregation, saying, Get back from around the dwellings of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram.
Okay, so he warns Dathan and Abiram are these guys who are co-conspirators with Korah. And he says, okay, they have their region of the camp. If you don't want to have what's going to happen to them, get away from them. Okay? Now, Moses actually explains what's going to happen here. Okay? So, I'll read verses 28 and following. Moses said, By this you shall know that Yahweh has sent me to do all these deeds, for this is not my own doing. So Moses is saying, the power, the authority, these deeds, what is being said and commanded to you does not really come from Moses, it comes from who? God. It comes from God. So Moses is saying, I have not sent myself. And God's going to make it obvious here. He says, okay, but if Yahweh brings about, and he says in verse 29, if these men die the death of all men, or if they suffer the fate of all men, then Yahweh has not sent me. Okay, what's dying the death of all men or suffering the fate of all men? What does that mean? What does it mean if you say, okay, that person, they died the death of all men? What's that kind of general expression mean? Yeah, Hudson?
That they live a long life.
Yeah, they live a generally long life. They die of what we would call kind of natural causes. They're not murdered. They're not like struck down by God in some obvious way. Okay, that they die the death of that's kind of normal, right? Okay. Now, Moses says, if they die like this, then you can know that God hasn't sent me. However, verse 30, but if Yahweh brings about an entirely new thing, and the ground opens its mouth and swallows them up with all that is theirs, they will descend alive into Sheol, place of death. Then you will understand that these men have spurned Yahweh. So Moses is saying, look, if God does something totally new, that God obviously kills them in a miraculous way, you know that you're not complaining ultimately against me, my words, my authority. You're ultimately spurning God. Okay? And so they get around them. Now Moses finishes speaking. This happens quickly. Right? Look at verse 31. As he finished speaking these words, so like Moses gets done with announcing how this is going to go, look what happens. The ground that was under them split open, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them up, and all their households, and all the men who belonged to Korah with their possessions, so that they and all that belonged to them went down alive into Sheol, and the earth closed over them, and they perished from the midst of the assembly. And all of Israel who were around them fled at their outcry and said, the earth may swallow us up. So everybody runs away. Fire also came forth from Yahweh and consumed 250 men who were offering incense. So there's actually two things that happen here. Number one, Korah's group, the ground opens up, they all fall in, and the ground seals over top of them. And then people run away, but the people who are like offering fire and are kind of on the outskirts, not standing near Korah, but on his team, God sends down fire and kills a bunch of them. Okay? So you would think, right, that the lesson here is obvious. Okay, right? The lesson here should be obvious, right? What's the conclusion? What did God say to Moses? What did Moses say to the people? What did this whole event show?
That Moses is right.
That Moses is right. Moses and Aaron are the ones that God has specially chosen, and that you don't get to just assert yourself around what God has said, who God has chosen. You don't get to go around the priesthood. You don't get to go around Aaron. You don't get to go around Moses. Okay? And God made it very obvious that the authority is not ultimately with Moses and Aaron, but Moses and Aaron speak and act because the authority comes from where? From God. Okay. They don't get it. They do not learn the right lesson. Moses even said, God's going to show who he's chosen. He makes it really obvious. He's going to show that he has not chosen Korah because they kill him. The ground opens them up, sucks them in, and that's exactly what happened. But look at the wrong conclusion that the people draw. Okay, so they still don't understand this. And then there's going to be a plague after this because they don't learn. They basically said, Moses, that was really mean. That's what they say. Moses, why did you do that? That wasn't nice. Those are God's people. It's like, well, wait a second. If they're God's people, then why are they asserting themselves against God? Right? But look at verse 41. But on the next day, the sons of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron, continue pattern, saying, you are the ones who caused the death of Yahweh's people. So they're like, Moses and Aaron, that wasn't very nice to kill the people of God. I know they were, asserting themselves among you, saying you've gone far enough, this isn't your job, whatever, but you really shouldn't have done that. Well, the people of Israel still don't get it. It wasn't Moses and Aaron who did this judgment. It was God. Moses and Aaron didn't bring fire from heaven. They didn't cause the earth. It's not like, Gandalf from Lord of the Rings, the staff. It's not like that, okay? And Moses is not doing, he's not Gandalf, being a wizard opening the ground. But that's how they're interpreting it. They still don't understand that this is what God has done. So it shows you, again, just like in the life of Jesus, unbelief does not interpret even miracles correctly. This is sometimes why Jesus didn't do miracles, because he'd say, you no matter what will draw the wrong conclusion. Even if somebody rises from the dead, you won't be convinced if you don't believe the scriptures. Okay, so there's another issue that comes up. So in Numbers 17, God says, okay, I'm going to make it obvious again what the priestly family is. Okay, so he says, I want every tribe of Israel to take their leader take a staff, a rod, and I want you to have all of your rods laid out in front of the tent of meeting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Okay? And God says, I'm going to cause flowers to grow and blossoms and buds to grow on one rod, the rod of the priest's family that I have chosen. Okay? So you have Aaron is of the tribe of Levi. You have Aaron's rod. Okay? And the next day, Aaron's rod buds and has flowers on it. Okay? So obviously God has shown that he makes it really obvious, which it should have been already, but he makes it really obvious that Aaron's rod, he's the one that's chosen the priesthood. Okay? And then this rod is taken, okay, they take it as a memorial and they put it somewhere so that they'll have it forever. Okay? They put it in where? Abigail?
The Ark of the Covenant.
Yeah, they put it in the ark. Yeah. And this is important because the ark represents, with the rod inside of it, that, and remember, the ark represents God's presence. It's also the place where the priests make atonement. So it represents this idea of God's chosen priesthood. You don't get around God's way of saying, this is my priest, this is how it works. Okay. Also in the ark, tablets of the law and the manna. Okay, God's provision, God's priesthood, God's law and covenant. Okay, go into the ark. This is important because and this is why it's important you guys did your tabernacle project, that you know what the tabernacle looks like and what all the items are for, because the author of Hebrews in Hebrews 9 will talk about the outlay of the tabernacle, and he'll talk about that the Holy Spirit is symbolizing these things, and he'll use them to talk about Jesus' work as the greater high priest and what Jesus accomplishes. So he uses that symbolism in a really important way. Okay, Now we move on then in chapter 18. There are some duties for the Levites, the priestly family of Aaron. That's narrowed down through there. Chapter 19, there's some more of that. There's ceremonies, ordinances of the sacrifice of certain animal for touching death and things of that nature, and uncleanness. Okay, and then in chapter 20, okay, this is another pivotal chapter. Chapter 20. We have the death of a couple of people who have been around in the story for a long time. And they're of generation 1 that comes out of Egypt. Okay? So we have the death of who?
Miriam, Aaron, Moses.
Not the death of Moses yet, but we do have the death of Miriam and Aaron. Yeah.
Why did Aaron die? Because was he among the people who didn't want them to go into the land?
That's a good question. Probably. I mean, yeah, because God doesn't allow Aaron to go in the land either. Aaron does the golden calf, obviously, and he doesn't. Even though he kind of led that, he doesn't go. He doesn't die because of that. But Aaron has some different, some points of major disobedience as well. But yeah, that's a good question. Maybe he wasn't identified with Joshua and Caleb, who obeyed God and wanted to go into the land. Neither was Miriam. So, and remember, he and Miriam both asserted themselves against Moses in Numbers 12. Miriam gets the leprosy punishment, but both of them are trying to take over Moses' role as prophet. Okay, so at this point they die. Okay, so but this is, you got to think about this in terms of the context of Moses' life. Moses has lived a long time. He's brought about the Exodus through the power of God. Okay, this whole generation comes out. They're going to die in the wilderness, but they start dying off. Okay, they have children. And Moses knows them as well, and they start to grow up and interact and do stuff with Moses, and he knows them too. But Moses is getting to this place where he's old, where his family and friends, people he knows, are dying off. Now he has children and stuff like that, grandchildren, all these things, but Moses' generation is dying, and he's going to outlive them. Okay? And this happens with... you guys haven't really experienced this yet, and I haven't experienced this yet, but older people, when they start to get in the age 60s, 70s, their grandparents by that point are usually dead. Their parents by that point have usually died. They hopefully have children, grandchildren, that's their family, but it's going forward now. They don't have, then they start to have aunts and uncles die, and then cousins and brothers and sisters, and then close friends. And I've heard old people say as they get together, at memorials, I've heard people say this at memorials at my church, they're like, yeah, this is just kind of how it is, we're just in that stage of life where a lot of people are dying off. And so Moses is going to outlive his generation, his group, and to the next generation that's going to go into the land. But Moses' disobedience we see here in this chapter as well. And Moses' disobedience is going to have a pretty serious consequence for him. Okay. So let's see what happens with... so Miriam dies in verse 1. Okay. They mourn her. But look at verse 2. Okay. Now there was no water for the congregation, and they assembled themselves against Moses and against Aaron. This story should sound familiar, right? Have they complained about no water before? Yes. Exodus, you may not know the chapter. Very soon after the Exodus, Exodus 16, generation number 1 complains about it. This is either generation number 1 or mixed with generation 1 and 2. But now they're years later complaining, there's no water for us out here. Okay? Now, I was thinking about it this morning, right? It's like we're in a classroom, we're in an insulated classroom, clothing, shelter, things like this. And I was considering the fact that I have never been without access really to water or something to drink or food or whatever, I mean, very temporarily. And I don't think you guys have been either, maybe for an amount of time, but not really in the desert, camped out in extreme temperatures. And you look around, you don't even have wells to get out of the ground. I mean, we have sinks and stuff like this. And so I was thinking to myself, I'm like, man, if I was really in that position, it would be very hard to think that I would trust God and say, okay, well, God is just going to provide. That may be true, and that would be the right attitude to have, but I do wonder if I would really say, start to think about, toward God, I need this and you're not providing this. Is God really good? Okay. So anyway, it's just to have some perspective. This is sin no matter what, but just to appreciate a little bit their circumstance. And so they assemble around Moses and Aaron, and listen to what they say. Remembering the deaths that have taken place because of complaining about the manna, the deaths that have taken place because of Korah, the deaths that have taken place because of trying to enter the land, the deaths that have taken place for all sorts of different things, the golden calf. Okay, this is what they say. The people contended with Moses and spoke, saying, "If only we had perished when our brothers perished before Yahweh." Perishing like they perished is not good. Perishing before Yahweh is not a good thing. That's God's act of judgment in your death. Okay, they're saying, "Man, gosh, I wish I had sinned enough back then and stuck with the people that died in the God's past judgments. That would have been better than this." And now look at verse 4. They again question God's character. "Why then have you brought Yahweh's people, Yahweh's assembly, into the wilderness for us and our beasts to die here?" I've said it, it kind of sounds like a joke, but they're like, you're trying to kill us out here. God's not good, he's trying to kill us. He's either unwilling or unable to help us, and we're going to die. Okay, verse 5. "Why have you made us come up from Egypt to bring us into this wretched place? It is not a place of grain or figs or vines or pomegranates, nor is there water to drink." Okay, yeah. Yep. And they have a point here, right? There's not this stuff. But you guys understand, you guys know what irony is, right? Okay? Irony is when you make a statement that's like people aren't getting the full understanding of what they're saying, or it's like, okay, well, it should be that way, but it isn't. They're right. There aren't vines, pomegranates, fruit, food, stuff like this, water out where they are. But there is all that stuff in what land? Not in Egypt.
Israel.
In Israel, in Canaan. They could have had that. They're like, man, it would be great to have all this good stuff that God would bless us with. And the irony here is, well, you could have had it, but you didn't go in. So now you're stuck out here and you're blaming God, but really they should be blaming themselves. Yeah, Hudson?
Do you think that those people who died in the wilderness and died to the punishment of God, do you think they went to heaven?
In large part, probably not. Because I don't know. It's like I don't know individuals. I can't judge, any percentage, things like this. But the way that the New Testament and Old Testament refers to them in warning is that it doesn't make it sound like that they knew God and were saved. Maybe some were, but either way, their whole generation is wasted and dies in the wilderness. Because Jude 5 talks about the Lord brought him out from Egypt, but destroyed those who didn't believe. Hebrews 3 and 4 and Psalm 95 will say, be careful of not believing God and then failing to enter God's rest. Okay, so Hebrews is warning, don't be like that generation that died in the wilderness. So I don't think we exactly know, right? Were some of them saved and they're just like Moses and they're just dealing with the consequences of their sin? Or, because sometimes you can be a believer but have consequences of sin undo a big part of your life, or a lot of them unsaved, unregenerated, right? They don't have a heart to know and love God, right? So it's hard exactly to say, but that's a good question. But the warning is there still for us. It's just kind of like today. We don't know exactly in our churches who really believes, who's saved, and who's not, right? So that's the warning that's given to us. Yeah, Macy?
Oh, well, I was just wondering, so there was like the whole generation like died off.
Mm-hmm.
But does that mean, or I guess, is it implied that like nobody from that generation followed Joshua and Caleb?
Yeah, only Joshua and Caleb go in. But it's everybody who's 20 and up of that generation at that time. So yeah, people below 20 we're going to be considered the next generation. So it does imply, I think very strongly, that whole group does not obey, that they don't believe. Now, does that mean they didn't trust in God for their individual salvation? I don't know, but you see the unbelief here is their problem, all the way through. Yeah, good questions. Okay. Now look at, so they could have had it. Now verse 6, chapter 20, verse 6, then Moses and Aaron came in from the presence of the assembly to the doorway of the tent of meeting, fell on their faces. They fall on their faces a lot. And then the glory of Yahweh appeared to them, and Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, okay, now here are the instructions, because Moses is going to get in trouble. Okay, here are the instructions, and listen to them carefully. 20 verse 8. Take the rod, you and your brother, and assemble the congregation, and speak to the rock before their eyes, that it may yield water. You shall thus bring water for them out of the rock, and let the congregation and the beast drink. So God does answer their request for water. So it's like they just didn't have to complain and question God's character. God has brought about water before. Okay? But what are the instructions to Moses? Because it's a little bit different than the instructions he received years before in Exodus 16 with the rock and the water. This is similar, but yeah.
To tell the rock to give him water?
Yes, his instructions are to speak to the rock. Last time, God said, I will stand before you on the rock, take the rod with which you struck the Nile, and hit the rock, and water will come out. Okay? And 1 Corinthians 10:4, Paul says, and the rock was Christ, in the sense that God and the angel of the Lord, who will be Christ, stands on the rock, receives what the people received, the getting hit with the rod of judgment, and then the water goes out to the people. This time it's different. Moses is just told, speak to the rock. But Moses is angry, and understandably angry, because for him this is round 2 of this event. Okay? So Moses, what does he do? Look at verse 9. So Moses took the rod from before Yahweh, just as he had commanded him. Okay, so he's supposed to have his rod. Verse 10, and Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly before the rock, and he said to them, listen now, you rebels, shall we bring forth water for you out of this rock? Okay, so Moses, here's problem number 1. I don't know if the problem is necessarily, he says, listen, you rebels. Sometimes Moses calls them the rabble. Sometimes he calls them stiff-necked and uncircumcised of heart. Sometimes he calls them rebels. He calls them disobedient. He calls them all sorts of things. So he says, listen now, you rebels. And then he says, here's the first part of the issue. Shall we bring forth water for you out of this rock? Moses, instead of, like before, entrusting himself to God and saying, hey, the authority is not ultimately with me. God's using me, but it comes ultimately from God. Now Moses is saying, okay, I'm going to give you water. We're the ones who are doing this. We're going to make it happen. And so now Moses, verse 11, Moses lifted up his hand and struck the rock twice with the rod. So now Moses is slapping the rock with the rod, okay, which is not showing honor in the sense to God by following his instructions, believing what he said, okay? And so He says, instructed with water, and water came forth abundantly in the congregation, and there be strength. Okay, now look at verse 12. This is where Moses gets in trouble. But Yahweh said to Moses and Aaron, okay, so this is to both of them. They both sinned here. Because you have not believed me to treat me as holy in the sight of the sons of Israel, therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land which I have given them. Okay, Numbers 20:12. Okay, you got to remember that one. What is the consequence? And this answers the earlier question I think Patrick asked. Why doesn't Aaron go into the land? Well, it's this event. I just realized is identified. What is the consequence for Moses of what he did here? Yeah.
Not being able to go into the land.
Yes, he will not go into the land, and neither will Aaron. Aaron will die in this chapter. Moses will live. God will take him up on the mountain before he dies and let him look into the land, but he knows he's not going in. And
Why
so,
does Aaron die because of it?
oh, because he's along with Moses. Shall we bring water forth for this rock? So it's like they're now saying, okay, we're the authority. And so in doing that, God says, you have not treated me as holy in the sight of the people. Problem number one, you didn't believe me. Problem number two, you didn't treat me as holy. Okay, is what happened here. Okay, so, I mean, this side would be a big disappointment for Moses. And Moses in Deuteronomy is not happy about. He accepts that this is what God has said for him, but he's not happy with the people in a lot of senses in Deuteronomy. But Moses, knowing he's not going to go into the land, is going to have kind of a 5-sermon Bible conference on the law of how they're supposed to act and what they're supposed to do, how they're supposed to think, and their constitution for when they go into the land. And what book is that going to be? Last word of Moses, Deuteronomy. Yeah, he knows he's not going to go with them, so he has to send them with the constitution. 34 chapters.
It's one sermon?
Not one sermon. It's one book, but it's divided probably into about 5 sermons, and then it includes other things. Moses gives him a song. He includes like some other stuff in there, some history and stuff. But yeah, so it's 34 chapters long, and it's a great book. We'll get into it next week. But yeah.
So is he probably like one of the last people to die of that generation?
Yeah, probably. Caleb is the only one left after that. So Caleb and Joshua get to go in. So okay, and then it says those waters. Those were the waters that come out of the rock of Meribah. This is what the place is named. Meribah, because the sons of Israel contended with Yahweh, fought with God, and he proved himself holy among them. Okay? Meribah means contention, conflict, fighting. They fought with God. Okay? Now, if you fight with God, okay, you disagree with God, it should be obvious who's wrong. You are. Yeah, you and I are if we fight with God. Okay? Psalm 95, David will pick up on this event, and David will look ahead to the future. Okay? Psalm 95, David will say, you shall not test the Lord like you tested him at Massah, okay, which is Exodus 16, which means Massah means testing. He asked, is Yahweh among us or not? Or at Meribah, contention, fighting with God. Okay? Psalm 95 will pick up on this and basically say, they tested God because they didn't believe him, and because they didn't believe him, they were not able to enter into God's rest. So Psalm 95 looks ahead to, in order to enter God's rest, you have to believe. Okay? Now, Hebrews 3 and 4 will use Psalm 95 and say, look, when Joshua went into the land and brought the people into the land, does the Bible end there? Does everything get restored, go back to the goodness of creation and blessedness and everything like that when Joshua brings them into the land? No. So the author of Hebrews will say, look, when Joshua brought the people into the land, they didn't have real rest. Okay? He also says that there's more scripture after that. The author of Hebrews will also say David looks ahead to rest as well. Okay? And he says, he warns people, in Hebrews 3 and 4, if you refuse to believe in Jesus and you test God, you may not enter into the rest that is in Christ. Okay, so that's the warning that the rest of Scripture picks up on this as well, in the Old and New Testament. Okay, so Aaron dies in this chapter. Okay, this is 23 and 24 is where Aaron dies. And then we'll finish up here with looking at Numbers 21. Okay, so there's some fighting. Israel has a little bit of a victory in Numbers 21, 1 through 5. But then they, in Numbers 21, 5, they start to complain again. And about something very similar that has happened. Look at Numbers 21, 5. The people spoke against God and Moses. Why have you brought us up here out of Egypt to die in the wilderness? Okay, again, God's trying to kill us. He's not good. Okay. Now, listen to what they say. Complaint number 2. For there is no food and no water. Okay, well, what has God given them? He's given them food. He's given them water. Okay. And now, number 3, and we loathe this miserable food. Okay, meaning that we hate the food that we have. Okay. Now, do you see? I put up here a statement. Okay, quote that you can learn from this, which is that sin. This applies to all of us. Sin makes you stupid. Okay. You can say sin, fancier way, it's irrational, doesn't make sense. But sin, disobedience, has an ethical problem in it where we question God, we disobey with God, and it does not allow our brain and our reason to operate correctly and interpret things correctly. And sin makes us think and do and say stupid things. That sin makes you stupid. Do you see what is stupid about their complaint here? I mean, at least one thing was real obvious that stood out to me. Maybe it was obvious to you. Let's go to Sophia then, Pat.
God's been providing food for them and they're complaining about food when God's been already.
Yeah, God's provided food for them and they're complaining about food. Patrick, then Hudson.
Well, there's a fallacy in their argument because they're saying that God hasn't given them any food, yet then they complain about they don't like the food they have.
Yeah. I don't have any food and I hate the food. Right? There's a contradiction there, right? Hudson, you had your hand up? Okay, good. Abigail?
Well, also, before when they complain about food, there's been certain consequences. And so, the fact that even though it's a different generation, they could have seen how, what happened to their parents. And so now they're, complaining again, even though they probably know there's going to be consequences.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's not just the complaint about not having the food, but they realize when they've sinned like this before, there's been consequences. But that's how sin is. We think that somehow we'll get around the consequences, or we don't care, we just don't think about it. But that's what's going on here. That's why I talk about sin makes you stupid. Okay, and so it's kind of funny. There's this statement that kind of a joke where this lawyer's trying. There's this lawyer's trying to defend this guy who's accused of breaking some other guy's vase. Okay, you guys know what a vase is, right? And the lawyer makes 3 or 4 arguments. He goes, argument number 1, there is no vase. Argument number 2, the vase was broken when my client received it. Argument 3, he returned the vase without it being broken. Okay, do you guys see the contradictions? Number 1, there is no vase. Number 2, the vase was already broken when he got it. Number 3, he got the broken vase back in perfect condition. Right? So, anyway, that's kind of a lawyer trick. You throw things out and just see what sticks. Okay. Yeah, there you go. Okay, let's finish up here. We've got a couple minutes. I want to get through this event. Well, hang on, guys. I'm still talking about this. God sends what because of the complaining? Yeah.
A serpent?
Yeah, he sends the fiery serpents. I don't know what fiery serpents mean exactly, but probably a burning, stinging bite, venomous bite. And serpents are very dangerous when you're camping and stuff like this. So these serpents come out biting them, and a lot of people are dying. Yahweh sent fiery serpents among them, and they bit the people so that many of the people of Israel died. So the people came to Moses and said, "We have sinned because we have spoken against Yahweh, and you intercede with Yahweh that he may remove the serpents from us." God doesn't actually remove the serpents. And Moses interceded for the people. Then Yahweh said to Moses, "Make a fiery serpent and set it on a standard, and it shall come about when everyone who is bitten, when he looks at it, he will live." And Moses made a bronze serpent and set it on a standard. And when it came about, when a serpent bit any man, when he looked at the serpent, he lived. Okay. Jesus refers to this, John 3. He's talking to Nicodemus. Jesus talks about, just like Moses lifted up the bronze serpent in the wilderness, so the Son of Man will be lifted up, that everybody who looks on him and believes will be saved. Lifted up in Jesus' time means to be crucified. But Jesus says, look and be saved. Now, the important thing is, this is next door, basically, to John 3:16, most famous verse. Everyone who believes will not perish, but have eternal life. Israel's problem, over and over and over again, throughout all their history, and in the book of Numbers, is that they did not what? Believe. So Jesus is warning Nicodemus. He's giving him the gospel, giving him the truth. But he's saying, your problem back then is the same problem that's here now, that you need to believe. Not just believe, again, in Moses, not just believe in the serpent and God's healing miracle. You need to believe in Jesus. Okay? So Jesus references this. Real quick, not a great drawer, but have you guys seen this symbol before?
Yes.
Yeah.
Where? On what?
Isn't it like
The Red Cross. It's the
Red Cross, the medical symbol, the EMT. This is where it comes from. The serpent entwining the rod goes back to Moses. Although I don't know, the Greeks had kind of serpents on rods and stuff too. So maybe that serves as some of the background of this.
That
But
was also for their god of healing, so
oh,
some
interesting.
people believe that they got it from Moses and then believe that it was part of their god.
Okay, that may be.
Was that
Yeah.
Apollo?
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. All right, guys, we've got to end it there.